Well, good morning and welcome back to the first keynote panel of today's MENA Project Summit 2021. Over the next hour, we will be having a discussion on the financing of projects in the Middle East and North Africa, and particularly looking at the role of private sector finance and PPP, public-private partnerships, and privatization initiatives across the region. This is, as I mentioned in the keynote remarks at the start of today's event, the financing projects is absolutely at the top of the agenda in terms of how we're going to achieve what we want to achieve in the region. And so this is perhaps the most important conversation of today's event. So I do encourage you all to get involved. You can submit questions by using the comments tab on the right-hand side of your screen. You can send in questions to our panelists, and you can send in comments with your opinions and views on this important topic. So thank you for being with us, and please, I do encourage you to get involved. Now, we're absolutely delighted and lucky to have a fantastic panel of leaders from across the PPP sector in the region. And so today with me, we have Dr. Mohammed AlAgily, who is the Senior Advisor for the National Center for Privatization and PPP in Saudi Arabia, the region's biggest market. And I'm sure everybody will be aware of the ambitions of Vision 2030 and of the National Center for Privatization. So welcome, Dr. Mohammed. We're also very lucky to have engineer Attar Hanura, who's the director for the PPP Central Unit at the Ministry of Finance in Egypt. And I'm sure many of you will know Attar from previous conferences. He's been the figurehead for Egypt's PPP plans for several years, and that country is really pushing ahead now with its project program. So we're lucky to have Attar, and thank you for being with us again today. And last but certainly not least, Mark Kachuni has joined us. He is the PPP transaction lead for the Abu Dhabi Investment Office. And Abu Dhabi, you could say the UAE is slightly later to the game in terms of PPP compared to say some of the other markets in the region, but they're certainly not holding back now. And so ADIO has been really accelerating its initiatives to increase private sector financing and new forms of project delivery and funding in the UAE. So welcome, Mark, and thank you to all three of you. You can submit your questions as we go, and I will moderate them. So please use the screen on the tab on the right to submit your questions. So let's get on with it. Dr. Mohammed, if I can start with you, thank you first of all for your time today. Now, the National Center for Privatization and PPP, this is a hugely important organization in Saudi Arabia, and you have a very key role in delivering the reforms and the new forms of projects in the kingdom. Could you perhaps start by just giving us a little bit of an update on where the NCP is in its program, and what has been the impact of COVID on your plans? I mean, that's really kind of come in the middle of all of the sort of wider reform programs, and must have thrown a spanner in the works. So perhaps you could just give us a little bit of an update on the Saudi market.
Thank you, Richard. First of all, allow me to welcome you and thank you for this opportunity together with the other colleagues, Mark and Engineer Attar. As you know, the Saudi market is a big market, and we are targeting privatization as part of our Vision 2030. During the past couple of years, Saudi Arabia was successfully able to conduct multiple privatization deals, resulting in closing of 29 deals in water, health, transport, and education sector. We also identified more than 100 opportunities over the next decade. Recently, and luckily, we received the first bids on the first healthcare PPP infrastructure project, and there are more to follow. Similarly, we have multiple deals in the education sector, and we were able to successfully close one, and expecting more. The interesting part is there are diversities in the nature of the PPP project. It's not only infrastructure typical deals. Now you can see PPP deals happening in the digital transformation, digital infrastructure, and so on. As you know, unfortunately, for the last 2 years with the COVID pandemic, multiple changes happened in the international market that affected the financing market, and especially the structuring of the PPP deals. We all know that there are changes in the prices regarding the logistics supply chain, and also there are the effects on labor and operational capacity of companies. So here what we did is we tried to cope into all of these changes by having a lean contract that enabled the investor during different stages of the bidding process to submit their rationale and understanding of COVID associated cost, direct or indirect, and then we collect them and give them an exclusive list, or let's say an indication list in which cost should be accounted as for COVID and which cost shouldn't be, and coming up with a mitigation plan to switch on, switch off the COVID related effect. But as you know, it's becoming an endemic that we need to deal with and need to cope for all PPP type of deals.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. Just if I can ask you on some of those COVID measures, the mitigation measures. So that is the purpose of those measures. That's because of the additional risk and uncertainty facing developers, is it? So these are measures. These are financial measures to sort of mitigate the additional risk that you don't want investors to have to carry that.
Sure. As you know, the effect of COVID not only have its element on the cost itself, but also on the timeline of the project, which will associate indirectly with the cost. Also, there are the government measures that are associated with such an endemic. Therefore, we realize that this is something that needs to be coped in within the contracts rather than any pandemic or any new epidemiological risk that might happen in the future. Hence, a specific type of regime was introduced for COVID-related in order to deal with the changes in the financial market and the debt market and so on. At the same time, the associated change in the cost of development the deal itself.
So is that, if I've understood correctly, so that is a kind of accountancy process where the developers or the bidders, they can sort of ring fence unexpected costs or additional costs because of COVID. So you have sort of two balance sheets. Is that the way that works?
Mainly, you can describe it this way. However, we can go into further details in that. I think it needs a complete session to discuss how to mitigate.
Yeah, I'm sure it does.
To COVID.
Okay, and then you mentioned at the beginning that you've completed 29 deals so far. So congratulations on that. That's fantastic, and that you have 100 opportunities, PPP opportunities over the next decade. Where do you see? I mean, this is a highly reductive question, but you mentioned healthcare and education just now? Are those the sort of the biggest opportunities for PPP, healthcare and education, or do you see an even split across different sectors? Transport, water, wastewater. How does that break down?
So we have multiple deals in different sectors. Actually, we are targeting 17 sectors. As we know, the social PPPs have been increasing over the last couple of years together. Utilities is the leaders always, water and power. Transportation, again, is a big theme. Usually the risk is in social related infrastructure more than economic related type of PPPs that you can talk about, like transport and utility. And of course, we're targeting multiple sectors. As I said, we have 17 sectors under the radar. But what we are trying to do is to have a split and equal type of opportunities across these different sectors. And as I mentioned, we're looking at 100 plus. Maybe later on there might be an announcement regarding the national strategy for privatization that everyone will know about, inshallah.
Okay, thank you very much. And just one final question for you, Dr. Mohammed, is in terms of the investors, are most of the investors local Saudi companies and Saudi investors, or is the majority of investment coming from internationals?
Well, we have, luckily, we have a very strong market here in Saudi competing internationally. We have a big portfolio of companies locally. Plus, we are receiving interest from all over the world, and we already have international companies working in the Saudi market. We have the Chinese, American, Japanese, Korean, all type of companies are competing, and everyone have an equal opportunity. So we're targeting national and international and providing multiple scheme of facilitating the funding for this institute. Like recently, there was the announcement of the National Infrastructure Fund, a fund under the National Development Fund that signed a strategic partnership deal with BlackRock to structure this fund and is targeting finance. Assisting in financing projects valuated at 200 billion riyal. So the government is giving all its major focus on PPP and privatization deal by enabling national funds, Exim banks. There was the announcement of the Saudi Exim Bank a couple of days ago. All of these will help in increasing project finance and aiding investors in injecting more capital and operational expertise in the market.
Okay, thank you very much, Mohammed. I'm very interested in the announcement about the Exim Bank, but I will come back to that later on. I want to bring in some of our other panelists first. So thank you, Dr. Mohammed, for your comment. I can see that we already have some questions that have come in for Mohammed and the panelists. Please keep your questions coming. Engineer Attar Hanura, thank you very much for your time today. I know how incredibly busy you are. You are the director of the PPP Central Unit at the Ministry of Finance in Egypt, and Egypt has this huge program of infrastructure projects at the moment, and PPP in particular is at the heart of that program. Could you perhaps, just as a sort of to set the scene, provide us with a bit of an update on where you are with the PPP projects in Egypt at the moment?
Richard, thank you very much for having us on this panel with my colleagues, extinguished panelists. The position of the PPPs in Egypt now is, as you just mentioned, is in the heart of the infrastructure, filling the infrastructure gap. We are actually, currently I'm working on 15 projects with a pipeline of about 51 projects coming into the the next 3 to 4 years. What we're working on now, 8 waste to energy projects, and there are 8 waste to energy projects actually out of 20 projects to come in the same category. We've got 4 warehouses, strategic warehouses spread over the country. This is 4 strategic warehouses out of 13 to come within the next couple of years. We're working on the second dry port in Egypt, which is in 10th of Ramadan. It's a dry port and the logistics center, and actually we are in the middle of procurement now. I've got the second wave or the second stage of the 1,000 schools already awarded. The first one, and actually they came into service. The second wave of around 70 schools, we are in the middle of procurement now. We expect to sign the contract within next May, just after Ramadan, inshallah. And we have 5 dry ports to go. Okay, and I'm working currently as well in the closure of terminal in port in Dumyat, in New Dumyat. It's a container terminal. These are the projects that we're working on as we are talking, and this will be closed within the next few months. We have in the pipeline, in the preparation of the pipeline, we've got 4 desalination projects. Egypt now is working on a huge desalination program.
Yeah.
Actually, it's a 30 years project up to 2050, and we want to expand the capacity of the desalinated water from 1.2 million that we have currently up to 7.3 million cubic meter per day. And this is a very huge one. We actually have currently working on 4 desalination projects. The 5-year plan is containing 18 projects. These are the first 4 of them. We have wastewater treatment plant that we're working on the feasibility study of it. We expect to send it to the market within the next 4 months. We've got another 4 dry ports to go. We're putting each one every 6 to 8 months, putting another one. We've got 3 berths or 3 platforms in Alexandria and the Khela ports, seaports, for different reasons, for grains, for multi-purpose, for dirty purpose, and for another new port, entirely new port in south, in a place called Safag. So these are the pipelines that we have near, and we are still building a 5 years pipeline that will be announced within February, inshallah.
Well, thank you. That's incredible, and congratulations on the successes you've had so far. I mean, the first thing that springs to my mind when you outline such a big program, and I guess we've just heard from Mohammed in Saudi Arabia. Is there enough money out there? Are there enough developers? Are there enough skills? Is there enough financing out there to deliver these? Are you concerned at all about capacity?
Look, we have the same. Egypt is one of the big countries in the region. We have already local developers that have built their capacity within the last 15 years to bid on PPP projects. PPP projects, not all companies can bid on it. They have to have this kind of experience and knowledge how to price the PP projects. They need advisor. However, most of the bidders that we receive in different bids are coming into form of consortium, and this consortium normally one Egyptian company with 1 or 2 or maybe 3 other companies from different parts of the world. So will come the operators, the know-how, the financiers, Egyptian companies. So there's a full range of companies and developers are willing to participate in the market, and actually they are bidding on different projects, and some of which are already in the pipeline, willing to participate once the projects are announced. There is no problems now in companies or investors coming to this market. Once the project is well studied, the contracts are balanced contracts, the procurement and the selection is very transparent, you'll always find bidders and investors to come. I want to tell you one of our experience. Everyone knows that Egypt went through 2 revolutions, 2011, 2013, and we suffered from political instability, economic instability, and in 2016 we had the devaluation of the pound. I want to tell you that some of our project, and that some of our project was tendered and awarded during this period, which is high risk period. However, the projects were well studied. Definitely, number of bidders were much more less than now, and the cost was a little bit higher because there was a risk. But we meant to keep on the PPP projects up and running and protected, even in these periods of instability. Uh, the financing, we have, in the PPPs, the financing is the issue of the public sector. We find now that the EBRD, the IFC, African Development Bank, AIIB, the EU, all these different IFIs are participating heavily in the Egyptian PPP projects. And we work with them in the very beginning in the bankability of the project and how to structure the projects to make sure that the project, when it's pushed to the market, is bankable and everyone is.
So the bankability of projects has always been a challenge for PPP. Certainly, from what I've seen. Now, Mohammed talked about the extra risk of COVID and some of the steps that Saudi Arabia has taken, to sort of mitigate the COVID risk. How has COVID affected Egypt's PPP program, if at all?
Definitely. I mean, we are part of the country, of the world, and this COVID effect is a global effect. As Dr. Mohammed just mentioned, it hit clearly the supply chain, which is the financial impact and the time impact on the projects. So the COVID actually had affected the current project that is where the developers are in the construction phase or in the operation phase. Okay, and we have to deal with each project separately. It affected as well the projects that we are preparing, because you know that we need a lot of advisors and consultants from Egypt and from different places in the world, and they have to come in and to do their due diligence and their work and all these things. Online is not always replacing the field visits. This delayed a little bit the preparation of some of the projects, so we have to delay it a bit.
Are you doing any? So Mohammed talked about the some of the financial support or the separation of sort of the unplanned COVID costs and financing, and sort of two parallel, in simplistic terms, two parallel sort of balance sheets. Is that something that Cairo is doing as well, sort of to help sort of
we are doing it,
not deter investors?
We are doing it, and already we did in some of the projects that already signed and already in the operation phase. We have to because look, in our contracts we have a full chapter regarding how to deal with force majeures, and we considered that the COVID is one of the force majeure. So we have to do a re-equilibrium of the contracts. We have to revisit the financial and the timeline or the time plan of the project, and this is already done. And there is mechanism in our contracts that how to calculate this and how to revisit the financial models submitted at the financial closure and put this kind of mitigation and the unitary payment or the cost of the service is adjusted accordingly. So already this is a regular procedure that we were doing now. Definitely in the beginning was a little bit of issues. How long will this effect will impact?
Yeah.
But actually this is a fact that we have to live with, and this was done.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Engineer Attar Hanura. If anyone has questions for Attar or Dr. Mohammed about Saudi Arabia or Egypt's PPP plans and pipeline, please send in your questions. I can see some have already come in, so use the comment tab on the right-hand side of your screen to send in questions. I'm going to go back to the Gulf now, and we're going to Abu Dhabi. I'm going to introduce Mark Kachuni, who is the PPP transaction lead at the Abu Dhabi Investment Office. Good morning, Mark. Welcome. Thank you very much for your time. I think it's extremely exciting what's going on with ADIO and Abu Dhabi. I wouldn't say it's come from nowhere. Obviously, it's not come from nowhere, but certainly there's been a rapid acceleration in my awareness of PPP in Abu Dhabi. So perhaps you can just provide a quick overview of ADIO's plans and any keynote thoughts that you have on PPP in the UAE.
Perfect. Thank you, Richard, and it's a privilege to be speaking alongside Dr. Mohammed and Engineer Attar. So just to provide a bit of background on the Abu Dhabi Investment Office. So ADIO was established in 2019 to develop investment plans and programs aimed at encouraging both domestic and foreign investment in Abu Dhabi. So this includes the establishment of our PPP unit. The Abu Dhabi government has also recognized that social infrastructure is something we can look to deliver as PPPs. So unlike the utility sector, which is well developed and well established in Abu Dhabi, ADIO being the centralized PPP procurement agency, we developed a robust, clear, and transparent framework to govern and deliver PPP projects in the Emirates. And I would encourage everyone on the call today or on this webinar today to have a look at our website. We have our guidebook, which sort of sets out, it functions as our procurement manual, which we follow for all our current and upcoming transactions as well. So in terms of our current, pipeline of projects, we currently have 2 live tenders. There's the Zayed City Schools project and the Noor Abu Dhabi LED Phase 2 project, both of which are currently in RFP stage. In terms of our future pipeline of infrastructure PPP project, these will be announced very shortly, and the focus will be on social infrastructure. So it should cover primarily transport, municipal, i.e. potentially car parks, education, amongst other sectors as well. So this just provides an overview in terms of who ADIO is and where we're going in terms of our pipeline.
And for the, for social infrastructure projects, certainly something like education, will the actual core education services be part of the PPP, or are the PPPs focused on the physical assets and the core curriculum or healthcare, whatever, is separate?
Yes. So typically, for the education space, the PPP would focus on the design, finance, maintenance, and obviously the handback of the asset. The curriculum itself sits with ADEC and the Ministry of Education, so that sits outside the PPP contract.
So in the ADIO model, ADIO is the procurement agency for the physical assets, whether it's the school or the hospital or the road, and then the ministry, the relevant ministry or department, does the, I don't know what you call it, the operational part.
Yeah, exactly, the curriculum. So that sits back with the Ministry of Education.
And in terms of, in the past in the region, some sectors have been more difficult for PPP. Obviously, you mentioned electricity just now, where you've had, there's been a lot of success with, with power plants and IWPPs, and you've had sovereign off-taker agreements and feedstock agreements. So, the commercial model has worked. But we've had more problems on things like roads and transport projects. Is there a sort of policy on what projects are suitable and what projects are not?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So we work very closely in the initial stages with the relevant procuring entities. So in the case of roads, it would be DMT. We also work very closely with the executive office to undertake a robust project selection, criteria, where we look whether a project is bankable, looking stuff like precedent, both in region and globally. And we also look if we also undertake a very extensive needs assessment as well early on, just to establish the need for the project before going out to market. So our intention here is, if we're going to take a project out to market post business case, we will follow through all the way till the end.
Okay. And in terms of, you talked about municipal car parks, education and schools. Presumably one PPP won't be for one school or one car park. These will be for clusters, will they?
Exactly. So what we try to do, and it's typical, globally, is to bundle projects together to increase the ticket size and hence make a project more bankable. So for example, the Zayed City Schools here, that's a bundle of 3 schools. We're looking at multiple waves of a schools project coming down in the future, where we'll be bundling potentially 4, 5, 6 schools in one deal.
Okay.
And similarly with car parks as well. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. I know that in Abu Dhabi and actually in Saudi Arabia as well, there is a keen desire to get more listings on the stock market and to bring in investors that way. Does the PPP in Abu Dhabi, do the the project companies, the PPP companies, is there a requirement for them to list or anything like that?
There is no immediate requirement for them to list or a requirement that's explicitly stated. There are requirements that are set out in the partnership agreement that they'll obviously need to adhere to. But it's a very fair and equitable, I guess, requirement for the private sector. So we haven't seen any pushback in terms of what we've put out to market to date. Okay.
And then one final question, Mark, I asked this of Mohammed and Attar as well. In terms of COVID, now obviously ADIO is relatively new. You were formed in 2019, so COVID was 2020, so absolutely the wrong time. But how has that affected, your contract models, your investor appetite, any perceptions of the market?
Yeah, well, actually, what I will say is that Abu Dhabi has been somewhat lucky in that our social infra program has been in the design, planning, and procurement phase since early 2020, with our first waves of projects coming to market. And therefore, we've seen, I guess, firsthand the impact of COVID from a policy perspective, right through end user and supply chain disruption. So therefore, we were able to incorporate a number of lessons learned from PPP projects across the GCC and beyond, especially into our design, planning, through to transaction structuring and procurement, which in effect builds a resilience in the program itself. One thing I'd like to add here is the size and the nature and volume of our program has not necessarily been affected by how we deal with COVID-related matters. However, more so, it's on how we develop our PPP project requirements, such as the preparation of the needs assessment, the technical design requirements, through to how we develop a fair and equitable risk allocation on COVID-related points in our project agreements. So this includes elements which I think we've touched upon earlier as change in law, force majeure, and insurance requirements. The way we see it, Richard, is PPPs are long-term horizon projects, and we are in unprecedented times. But what we need to account for currently is all the eventualities. And by doing so, we build resilience into our, PPP program, and obviously ensure value for money for the Abu Dhabi government.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Mark. If anyone has any questions for Dr. Mohammed, Engineer Attar, or Mark, please send in your questions using the comments tab on the right-hand side, and we will get through as many as we can. Now, Dr. Mohammed, if I can come to you, I have a question. We have a question submitted by Ahmad, and it's similar to the question that I just asked of Mark, and it's about education PPPs. So will you be incorporating the educational aspects of the projects into your school's PPPs?
Thank you for the question. Today, what we are targeting is to improve the infrastructure of the education and the healthcare social infrastructure. The operation of this facility will always be the function of the government, as per today. There is no talk about privatizing the core service of education, and we're not exploring that at the current time.
So is that, as with Mark in Abu Dhabi, the NCP will be the procurer for the physical assets, the school or the hospital or the whatever, but the relevant ministry will deal with the core services. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. There are some changes when it comes to the way that we are doing business today. We identified NCP works as a support entity for all the different government entities in procuring their project. So today, as per the new privatization law and the government's rules that was established early this year, what we are doing is simply we work as a subject matter expert and a center of excellence to support different ministries and government entities to achieve these, and we give them all entire flexibility to do that and developing their deals with our advice. So we're trying as much as possible to kind of decentralize this approach when it comes to the way of structuring the deals with I don't want to support from NCP in adopting the best approach. And you can check all of these new rules and regulation that was published regarding privatization in the kingdom.
So the privatization law, the new privatization law, was introduced in, I think it was July. How important is that for PPP? I mean, is that a sort of essential foundation stone, or what does it do?
It is a cornerstone in PPPs. Today we have it, the PPP or privatization law is embedded within the laws of Saudi Arabia. There are specific channels. It identifies the authority matrix, identifies the entities that are responsible for carrying the deals and approving them, and establishing all the accountability responsibility issues around it. Plus, there are exceptions that previously you had to go to the Council of Ministers to get. Today, the privatization law dealt with these exceptions and made it clear how to deal with issues like the bankruptcy issue of companies in comparison to the corporate laws and so on, like the use of Arabic language or English language, and the step-in agreement and so on.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, one of the, over the years when we've talked about PPP at conferences, people have talked about the need for a framework, a sort of clear framework. It seems to me that is the purpose, or one of the purposes of the new law. Thank you very much, Dr. Mohammed. Attar Hanura, I have a question from you, also submitted by Ahmad. I'm not sure if it's the same Ahmad, but are you considering green funding in financing PPP projects? And how do you involve this in the financing structure? So ESG is a big topic right now for investors. How does that affect you?
Actually, this green funding and green projects, this is the new era of the PP projects that we are introducing now in Egypt, in terms of even structuring of the project, not only the financing. So green financing, and you know that Egypt already have issued a few months ago the green bonds and all this kind of the so-called green financing. So this is appreciated and accepted in Egypt. However, we are working now with the IMF and the World Bank in building the new structure of green projects and green financing, how to structure a project, how to build a contract, including all these aspects of green financing, and introducing green financing in a project that was structured and procured and contracted under this umbrella. So this is something that we're working on now, and we will introduce the first green project within the next 6 to 8 months.
Okay, and what, if you don't mind me asking, what is different about that? Is it, are there some sort of carbon footprint KPIs, or how is that different to regular financing?
Look, it's how to deal with the outcomes of this green financing and green projects, like you just mentioned, the carbon credits or all this kind of gains of these projects. How could you deal with it in terms of financing? How you can deal with it with the project, with the operators of the investors and the government. So there should be the contract should be dealing with this. Who will be generating that? Who will be benefiting that? And how this would be shared. On the other hand, when the project is structured to be a green project, it puts some kind of burden on the private sector and the government as well to work out this project and implement all the measures to keep this project matching with all the regulations of the green economy and green financing, because it's not only we're not taking the colorful part of green projects and green financing. It's a burden on each and everyone. It have gains and it have benefit globally and on the country level and even the project level, and even on financial gains. However, it's another burden, and the government, the private sector, and the banks should be geared to accept and to be geared to structure such kind of projects. So this kind of learning process that we are working on heavily now in Egypt, in the PP unit, in the PP satellite units, with the IMF and the World Bank. They're working with us heavily on that, especially the World Bank.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, I want to ask this next question to each of you, because this is something that, over the years, I've seen this question come up many times, and it's about, I'll come to you first, Mark, but it's about the unsolicited proposals for PPP. So if somebody comes to the government with a proposal, the question, this is from Ahmad, are there any legal documents supporting unsolicited proposals? So if I start with you, Mark, and then I will ask Mohammed and Attar the same question. Does a PPP have to come from the government and then bidders, or can it come the other way?
It can definitely come the other way, Richard. So within Abu Dhabi, there is a framework that sits within ADIO for unsolicited proposals. We have supplementary, procurement procedures around that. These are also available on our website. And the way it works is the private partner would come to ADIO with their proposal. We'd review it, do an initial assessment to establish if it's viable or not. If it meets our criteria as a PPP, we would then link the private partner with the procuring entity and facilitate that entire process all the way, obviously, to tender stage.
Presumably, it would have to fit in with the national strategic plan in some way. It couldn't just be a random project.
Correct.
I guess that would be a real estate project, wouldn't it? But,
exactly.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Mohammed, if I can ask you the same question, is there a framework for unsolicited proposals from private developers?
Thank you, Richard. I think my colleague Mark answered the question properly. It's the same here in Saudi Arabia. So if you go and look into the PPP law and the governance rule that was published, there is a clear mechanism to deal with unsolicited proposal with identifying the authority matrix and the approval matrix to it. So we have a framework for this type of project, and it runs, as my colleague Mark said, both ways. It's either private sector come with an unsolicited proposal or the government tender a PPP project. Okay,
thank you, Mohammed. And Attar, is it the same in Egypt?
We just passed the amendments to our PP law, which is considered the first PP law in the region in 2010. We had passed from the parliament 3 weeks ago the final approval of the amendments of our PP law, which includes the unsolicited proposals and direct award and limited tenders as well. So this is one of the procurement methodologies. However, there are some kind of limitations and restrictions, because the unsolicited proposal is very important because it carries all the initiatives and the thinking out of the box from the private sector. Okay, that's the good part of it. However, it's still a critical issue because it could be the back door of escaping from competition. Okay, so this is always have limitation and restrictions how the project could be qualified as an unsolicited project. The second thing is that this project should get an approval from the Ministry of Planning and from the line ministry that is responsible for this kind of projects, because it should, as you just mentioned, and my colleague just mentioned, that it should fit with the national plan. The third thing is that once we get this proposal and we got all the procedures and qualification to qualify this project as an unsolicited bid, we go for the tendering procedures, which all the people follow the so-called Swiss challenge, which I think is not the appropriate methodology. And we have amended or developed another methodology, which we call it the Egyptian challenge, which is completely different system, but it's getting much more appreciation from the market. we can discuss.
Okay, I'm sorry, you're going to have to explain that to what the Swiss challenge and the Egyptian challenge. I don't know what those are.
Actually, the Swiss challenge is very strange to call it the Swiss challenge. However, Switzerland doesn't have any unsolicited bids, but it's called this. That's what we've learned in the last 15 years. It's called the Swiss challenge. The Swiss challenge is when the proponent proposes his unsolicited bid, and the government approves that as a solicited bid. They go with this proposal after amending it to the market, and they receive bids from the market on that proposal, on this project. And then the original proponent of the unsolicited bid has the first right of refusal to match. So if it's a wastewater treatment plant or whatever, okay, the market comes with 4 bidders, okay, so the best price could be matched by the service provider, by the original proponent, okay. This is in brief what is the Swiss challenge. So it goes to the market, there is sign of competition, and the proponent can meet the best price or can beat it, okay, and he takes the project. I believe that this in practice will never happen. I used to be a bidder before I worked with the World Bank and then come to the government. Everyone knows that any bidder to put or to compile a PPP proposal, it costs him some few million pounds, okay, and resources, time, money, people, and everything. Put yourself in the shoes of a bidder. Why should I go and get all this kind of cost and resources and submit a bid for a unsolicited proposal while I know 100% that my price could be beaten or matched for another one sitting on a rocking chair waiting for someone to put his bid? Why should I do it?
Okay. So what is the Egyptian? You said something called an Egyptian challenge.
Look, we do the same, but with some different issues. Number one, we give the proponent of the unsolicited bid the right to match if the difference between his price and the price coming from the market is within 5% or 10% or 7%. It's something depending on the project. So hypothetically 10%. Okay. So if he's proposing 10, and the market comes with 92, 93, he can match it. But if it comes with 90 or 89, thank you very much. You lost your opportunity. Why we're doing this? This will make the proponent of the unsolicited bid, he will sharpen his pen and write the best price that he can do, because he wants always to make this gap that it allows to match as narrow as he can. So he'll not put 100 while the price could be 10, because he can match it. Why he can spend his time. And the other bidders, number one, they will have an opportunity to take the project, okay, not as the Swiss challenge. Second, they will sharpen their pens as well and do all measures to make this gap as much as they can, so they can get better prices to escape from the 5% difference or the 7% or the 10% difference, so they can get the price. So there is an equal opportunity. There is an opportunity for the bidders and the unsolicited proposal, and by the end of the day, you're getting the best technical offer and the best price, instead of sitting with him and negotiating everything without a benchmark, without a reference.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very interesting and important. Dr. Mohammed, if I can come back to you, you mentioned earlier on the National Infrastructure Fund, the newly established National Infrastructure Fund, and also the new Saudi Export-Import Bank. Could you tell us a little bit more about those, please? And what role will they play in project financing and PPP?
So when it comes to the National Infrastructure Fund, as I said before, it was announced a couple of months ago, the establishment of the National Infrastructure Fund that will act as a part of the National Development Fund in funding infrastructure projects in the Kingdom. They're targeting different type of financing scheme that they will provide. And one of the things that they will be using is supporting PPP deals and investors that are applying for them and providing different type of financial support in their deals. The rationale behind it is well explained in the announcement that was done before, and they chosen BlackRock to come and structure this fund in order for it to be efficient and well established. Further details about it can be gotten from their official websites and their official channels, and we can have a separate discussion later on them. As for the Saudi Exim Bank, it was announced maybe 2 days ago or 3 days ago. It's simply an export and import bank that will support the exports from the Kingdom and the imports from out of the Kingdom in the typical way of how Exim banks usually work.
Okay, so that's sort of export credits and trade financing.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Now we've just got about 5 or 6 minutes remaining. So if you do have questions for our panelists, please send them in as quickly as possible and we'll get to them. Mark, if I can come back to you, we've had a couple of questions about local banks. So there is a question here from Hassan. He says, commercial banks in this region are generally unsupporting of PPP financing owing to the long-term financing and pricing issues. How do you see a solution for attracting financing PPPs from alternative sources? So I guess there's 2 parts to this question. One is about the role of local banks and commercial banks, and the other is about alternative sources. What's your thinking on that?
Yeah, so I can speak on within the Abu Dhabi context
Sure.
specifically. Is we've seen quite a bit of interest from both local and international lenders. We held extensive lender market sounding early on during the business case stages, where we solicit, lender feedback in order to structure a deal that's both bankable and obviously secures value for money for Abu Dhabi. So far, a lot of interest. Abu Dhabi has a very strong credit rating, and we've seen a lot of foreign direct, inflows coming into the Emirate. So it's a positive story for Abu Dhabi.
Okay, but in terms of commercial banks who might normally do things like corporate financing and that kind of shorter term deals, do you anticipate them opening up sort of PPP or project financing operations to tap into this?
Yes, yeah, and we've already seen movement in that space as well. So definitely.
And Mohammed, in Saudi Arabia, is it similar? Are the sort of local commercial banks interested in long-term project financing?
Look, for Saudi Arabia, the project financing has been there for more than 20 years ago, and there are the movement is bigger now when it comes to commercial bank adopting a project financing approach. But the commercial bank here are well established, and they are already doing that, and they are expanding in doing so.
Okay. And if I can just ask also, Mohammed, I don't know if you're able to comment on this because it's perhaps a different department, but with the Public Investment Fund, it seems to be the PIF. It seems to be getting involved in every aspect of projects and the Vision 2030 Giga projects, etc. Do they get involved in PPP?
PIF, usually they have their own partnership deals that they have with different companies globally and locally in order to develop mega projects in the kingdom. So their targets is mainly the projects that need big support from the PIF and big projects. Further discussion should be taken with the PIF official in this regard. However, the current pipeline of PPPs, they are more into lower in scale, or let's say, I don't want to say lower in scale, they are mega project. However, these are the ones that we believe the private market can compete for, and they have the ability to bid for.
Okay, understood. Now, Attar, we have a question here about the Swiss/Egyptian challenge. So this comes from Josh. Are the other bidders in the Swiss-Egyptian challenge aware of the proponent's submitted price?
No.
Okay, so it's blind.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, we have a question here from Venkata. Let me just read this. Are finance consultants allowed to participate in government PPP opportunities in terms of bringing together funding and operating parties and ultimately be responsible for project delivery? So I'll ask this of each of you. So if I start with you, Mark. So finance consultants, can they sort of, I guess this is a question about outsourcing what ADIO does to a private consultant, I guess. Does the question make sense?
I'll need to understand a bit more of the specifics of what's being asked, but generally speaking, there's multiple routes for bidders to qualify at the RFQ period. If a financial advisor or financial consultant wants to join a consortium, we'll have to obviously look at the specifics of that, and maybe they can bring in the funding part. But again, we'll need to delve into a bit in terms of what's being asked here.
Yeah. So the question, I'm just reading it again. Are they allowed to participate? Well, it sounds like yes. In terms of bringing together funding, I imagine that's to do with the bidding consortium, isn't it? And operating parties. So I guess the answer is yes, they're allowed to participate, I suppose.
Yeah, subject to delving further into the details.
Yeah,
I won't give a firm yes as of yet.
So to Venkata, the person who submitted the question, perhaps if you could clarify what it is you're asking, we can answer that. But
and just to add to that, there is for both the schools and the LED project, the RFQ documentation was publicly available, and within that, for the audience here, if they want to delve into those specific documents, they can see the different routes how bidders can qualify as well. So maybe that would be helpful.
Okay, thank you. And actually, Mohammed, we're getting towards the end of time, but one of the things, PPP is not new in the world and in this region, but in this region, it has been slow to take off outside of the electricity and water sector. And my perception of that is because the need hasn't been the same. In the Gulf in particular, you've got wealthy countries. Now that we've been through a few tough years and oil prices are now recovering, is it your sense that the political will has changed? PPP now has a critical mass or a political will behind it that means it's here to stay.
So since the announcement of Vision 2030, privatization and PPP is one of the cornerstones for this vision to be achieved. And there is always the support from all level of government on privatization and PPP and this can be noticed by actually giving most of the authority to the board for NCP to approve PPP deal. The board of NCP is chaired by the Minister of Finance, and they have and with another 8 ministers on the board. So there is definitely strong support for privatization and PPP in the government of Saudi Arabia.
Okay, well, thank you. I think that's a perfect note to finish the discussion. We've run out of time, I'm afraid, to go into more detail. Thank you to everybody for joining us today and for submitting your questions. Hopefully we got through most of them. If you want to send in further questions, we can circulate them to the panelists. But most of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Mohammed, Engineer Attar, and Mark for their time. I know how busy they are. Congratulations, gentlemen, on your successes so far, and I wish you lots more success on the road ahead as you deliver your programs. Thank you for your time today, and see you soon.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.